Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 229 for Ho-Oh the Bell's Toll. The episode begins with Ash and the gang having fully arrived in Akrotique City and deciding to stop at a Pokemon Center to analyze their map to see how far away they were from Mahogany Town. Ash and Brock, after studying the map for a while, came to the conclusion that there was a certain road that they could go down to get there faster, but Misty doubted this, although Brock and Ash assured her that they had studied the map for fucking hours at this point, so they knew what the best route was. Suddenly, Ash and the gang then hear a ringing sound coming from outside of the Pokemon Center and immediately see Nurse Joy and her Chansey run by as Nurse Joy explains that something must have been going on at Tin Tower, further stating her surprise by this because the Tin Tower never seemed to make much noise. As for Morty, he was currently outside the Tin Tower and he heard the noise as well, also remarking how it was unusual, and he suggested to himself that maybe this reasoning for the sound was because Ho-Oh was finally returning to the tower. Just then, his friend Yusin showed up and stated his belief that the sound could mean that the Pokemon called Suicune was returning, and both of them entered the tower to investigate. As for Nurse Joy and Ash and the gang, they went outside the Pokemon Center and saw that Nurse Joy's assumption was correct. The sound was coming from the Tin Tower, and Joy stated that this was unusual since the bells in the tower usually do not ring, even when there were strong winds. She then also tells Ash and the gang about Morty's assumption, not knowing that it was Morty's assumption, just knowing that it was a popular legend in the city, being that when there was a ringing sound being heard from the tower, it was supposedly meant to signal that Ho-Oh was coming back. Meanwhile, back with Morty and Yusin, when they entered the tower, they immediately spotted that yes, the gold bells were ringing. But when they went upstairs in the tower, to the 9th floor, to check on the other set of bells, the crystal bells, they found that they were missing, which was obviously concerning, since if the gold bells were ringing, signifying Ho-Oh or Suicune's return, then the crystal bells would need to ring as well, for the return to take full effect. So, Morty instantly sent out his Gengar and instructed him to find the crystal bells or the people who stole them. It should have been obvious who stole them, as Team Rocket was in the forest celebrating their successful steal. They were very proud of their steal, since they correctly guessed that with these bells, they would be able to summon the legendary Pokemon Ho-Oh, as James had read this in his guidebook of the city, clarifying that the bells apparently used to belong to Ho-Oh, so whenever it heard them ring, it would come to them. James also read more about Ho-Oh in his guidebook that explained that Ho-Oh was a fire Pokemon whose flames glow in 7 colors and can predict the future. All of this information obviously made Team Rocket try and ring the bells to summon Ho-Oh, but since they didn't realize that the bells were supposed to ring naturally, they got extremely upset when no sound came out of the bells. Jessie got angry since James and Meowth were the ones ringing the bells, and she thought that they weren't ringing them enough, so she shook them violently. But this unfortunately just caused one of the bells to go swinging out of her hand and break on a rock, with obviously no Ho-Oh being summoned either. Meowth tried to save the bell from breaking, but he couldn't make it to the rock in time, much to his dismay and Jessie and James's pure anger. Particularly James, since Jessie was the one who had broke it. Suddenly, as Team Rocket were glaring at the destroyed crystal bell, an eerie wind began to blow, as back at Akrotique City, inside the tower, the gold bells stopped ringing at the same time, indicating that the two events must have been linked somehow. Meowth is startled by the wind, and determines that this wind likely meant trouble was on the horizon. Meanwhile, Nurse Joy and Chansey had to return to their duties at the center, but Ash and the gang decided to go and investigate the source of the ringing at Tin Tower. However, before they could enter, they were blocked by Yusin, who had since left the tower with Morty. Gengar had returned as well, not being able to find the culprits who stole the crystal bells, leading Yusin to scold him a little bit, which in turn led Gengar to pull his mouth. Yusin then informs Ash and the gang that the bells had stopped ringing and there was now nothing going on inside the tower, as Morty then came out and confirmed this, greeting Ash and the gang. Ash instantly questions Morty on if what Nurse Joy had said about the bells ringing being a sign of Ho-Oh being nearby being true, with Morty confirming this as well, stating his belief that Ash happening to show up right as the bells were ringing must have been a sign that Ho-Oh was going to return, stating that even if the bells weren't ringing anymore, Ho-Oh still must have been nearby, even if it wasn't exactly at Akrotique City. Yusin then jumped in, asking why Morty thought that a random kid like Ash being here had anything to do with Ho-Oh, leading Morty to reveal to Yusin that Ash had saw a Ho-Oh right when he started his journey, so therefore Morty thought that Ash and Ho-Oh could have been linked in some way. Yusin frowns and gets angry at Ash, believing him to have been a liar, leading Morty to explain that Yusin was simply skeptical of Ash actually seeing Ho-Oh, since Yusin was a Legends expert, so he figured that if he hadn't been able to spot Ho-Oh, he didn't see why a random trainer like Ash could have been able to. Ash and the gang obviously want to learn more about the history of these bells that were supposedly related to Ho-Oh, so Morty agrees to tell them as he takes them to his gym along with Yusin and shows them a scroll depicting the ancient crystal bells and explains their lore. Essentially, the crystal bells had been inside the Tin Tower for 300 years after they were discovered from the remains of the burnt tower that Ho-Oh burnt, adding that the total amount of bells that were recovered were 4 crystal bells and 32 regular gold bells. Yusin then added that the bells have never rang in the history of the tower aside from today, and stated his belief that since the bells were said to be able to summon Ho-Oh, the bells ringing today meant that it was Ho-Oh's way of assuring the humans that it still watched over them. indicating that it was waiting for the day that the hearts of humans and Pokemon joined as one, with Yusin confirming that this would be the only thing that could make the Ho-Oh actually return, since the hearts of human and Pokemon joining as one would be the only thing that would remove Ho-Oh's anger toward the humans for wanting to capture it. Essentially, Yusin believed that Ho-Oh kept watch over the humans to see if they were doing good, and if they ever did do good to the Pokemon and there was no longer anyone who tried to harm Pokemon or hate them, then that would be when Ho-Oh returned, seeing that humans were now worthy. Ash and the gang questioned how Ho-Oh could watch over all of humanity on its own, leading Yusin to state that a legend regarding Ho-Oh and the Burn Tower stated that Ho-Oh did not watch over the humans alone. It had created 3 Pokemon to help it, known as the legendary beasts, Suicune, Raikou, and Entei, stating that the 3 Pokemon were born out of Ho-Oh's anger to the humans for trying to use its power, and also for burning the tower, further stating that the 3 Pokemon were born from the literal flames of the burning tower. Since their job was to watch over the humans, Ho-Oh wanted to give them abilities relating to the planet that would make them strong enough to interfere if the humans ended up being all bad, just like the ones who had tried to harm it and the ones who had burned the tower. So it entrusted them with the abilities of wind for Suicune, volcanoes for Entei, and thunder for Raikou as their sources of power, adding that the 3 legendary beasts were only to use these powers in self-defense, never to actually start a conflict. Morty and Yusin then show Ash and the gang a supposed picture of the 3 legendary beasts, and Ash recognized one of them and pointed it out, with Morty stating that that legendary beast was Suicune. Ash had in fact saw the Suicune back during his first episode in Johto, if you remember that, but of course Yusin didn't believe Ash, just as he didn't believe Ash's Ho-Oh encounter despite Ash's confidence that he really had saw Suicune, with Yusin stating his belief that there was no possible way that Ash could have seen Suicune, since Suicune only appeared to strong Pokemon trainers, according to his research, and added that if he had been searching for Suicune for all this goddamn time and hadn't found it, how could Ash have found it accidentally? Ash was tired of Yusin calling him a liar, so he asked if there was any way that he could prove to Yusin he was telling the truth, leading Yusin to challenge Ash to a battle, explaining that if Ash was able to beat Yusin, then he would recognize him as a good Pokemon trainer, and therefore understand that Suicune could have possibly encountered him. Meanwhile, back in the forest where Team Rocket were, it seemed as though Meowth's assumption of the wind bringing trouble was right, as Team Rocket soon found themselves surrounded by a whole bunch of bug Pokemon. James noticed they looked angry, so questioned Meowth as to why, wanting him to translate, leading Meowth to translate that the bug Pokemon were apparently angry that Team Rocket had accidentally broken one of the crystal balls, and the Pokemon then showed their anger as the Pokemon all fired a string shot at Team Rocket, trapping them. Anyways, back with Ash and the gang, Yusin was very adamant on battling Ash, even though Ash hadn't accepted yet, and ushered him to Morty's gym stadium where the battle would take place, and ordered that the battle would be a one-on-one battle. Morty didn't see the need for this battle to take place, as he simply told Yusin that Ash wouldn't lie, stating he was already a trustworthy trainer after he had beat him in his gym battle. Yusin was offended by this, as he thought that he could give Ash way more of a challenge than Morty could, and ordered Morty to judge the battle, to which Morty eventually obliged to. Ash was also confused as to why Yusin wanted to battle him, as he didn't think that him battling Yusin would prove him as a worthy trainer or not. However, he soon realized that perhaps he was wrong, as Yusin sent out a very powerful Pokemon, Alakazam, and Ash knew that if he was able to beat it, then he could definitely be considered a strong trainer, although he feared that he wouldn't be able to, knowing how strong Alakazam was. However, he simply just told Pikachu to go with the classic Thunderbolt and see how that would work out, as Morty retaliated, stating that his Alakazam was extra powerful because it was his partner in looking for legendary Pokemon, and ordered his Alakazam to use a psychic attack in retaliation. But before any of these attacks can land, meaning Pikachu's or Alakazam's, the battle is interrupted, as one of Morty's students that Morty had taught facts about ghost Pokemon to hurriedly rushed into the gym, knowing that Morty was meant to be the guardian of Tin Tower, and informed him that something bad was happening there. So this led Ash and the gang, and Morty and Yusin, to run outside to the Tin Tower to see what was going on. They immediately see that the tower was being covered in webs thanks to many bug Pokemon's string shots. These bug Pokemon included Caterpie, Weedle, Tangela, Parasect, Paras, Gligar, Spinarak, and Ariados. Ash and the gang, Yusin, and Morty go to try and remove the webs, but they're stopped in their tracks by some Tangela, who seemed very angry. To make matters worse, an entire group of Parasect then approach as well, and Ash tries to reason with all the Tangela and Parasect to let them in, but the Parasect simply respond by shouting out a sleep powder to try and put Ash and the gang, Yusin, and Morty to sleep, though thankfully they were all able to run away before the powder hit, returning to the safety of Morty's gym. Inside the gym, Ash and Yusin then look out the windows to see how the tower was holding up, only to see the rest of the town, and immediately call everyone else over to the windows, allowing everyone to see that the entire town was now being covered by webs, administered by all the bug Pokemon, not just the tower. As everyone watched in horror at the town being fully immersed in webs, Morty stated his belief that the disappearance of the crystal bells had something to do with the bug Pokemon's anger, revealing the fact that the legend of Ho-Oh and the legendary beasts also stated that the crystal bells maintained peace between humans and Pokemon, which was why Ho-Oh knew if they were ringing, then humans and Pokemon must have been getting along to some extent. But he feared that now that the crystal bells were gone, the peace that was administered by the bells was now gone, so now the bug Pokemon saw no reason to not attack the humans. Upon hearing this, Brock determines that if Ash and the gang just managed to find whoever had stolen the crystal bells and bring them back into the tower, then peace would return. Ash and Misty believed this as well, but Yusin, on the other hand, was skeptical, stating that the Pokemon may be too far gone, and were now set on creating a world without humans, even if the crystal balls did come back. Ash, however, was determined to prove Yusin's worries wrong, so he decided to go and find the crystal bells, even if it meant he had to face the Parasect, Tangela, and all the other bugs. So, with that, Ash headed out of the gym to head back to find the crystal bells, determined that he could take down any of the Pokemon. However, as soon as he exited the gym, he found that the Parasect were immediately outside, and he certainly didn't expect this, so he was caught off guard. He was going to try and battle them, but Parasect were set on attacking first. Thankfully, before they could do anything, everyone else then came to Ash's aid, coming out of the gym, and Morty sent out his Gengar and ordered him to use Confuse Ray, which put all the Parasect in a confused state, stopping their attack. Morty then has his Gengar use his ghostly powers to try and locate the crystal bells again, and this time, Gengar actually locks onto their location, and begins leading Ash and the gang through the forest so they can find them. However, they find their path blocked by several walls of string shots, leading Ash to send out his Cyndaquil to use Flamethrower on them to burn the webs. Meanwhile, Team Rocket was still in the forest, with Ash and the gang and Morty and Yusin unknowingly heading to them, since they were the ones with the bells, and Team Rocket was currently trapped inside of cocoons, thanks to the bug Pokemon using their string shots on them. And Team Rocket were not just scared because of this, but they were also scared that the bug Pokemon were going to attack them further, because despite several bug Pokemon going into the actual town, several of them were still keeping watch over Team Rocket. Anyways, sure enough, as Ash and the gang continued to use Cyndaquil to burn through the webs, Gengar eventually led them all to Team Rocket's location, which was also the location of the crystal bells. Ash and the gang are focused on Team Rocket being in cocoons, but Morty was instantly focused on the crystal bells, and he runs toward them as they were sitting below Team Rocket by a tree. Morty was so laser focused on the bells though that he didn't notice all of the bug Pokemon surrounding him, who then proceeded to block his way so he couldn't retrieve the bells, with Tangela using Vine Whip on him, striking him down. Extremely angry, Brock then directs his attention to the bells as well, though notices that there were only 3 crystal bells, and remembers from the legend that there were supposed to be 4, leading Meowth to reveal that Jessie had destroyed one of them. Only after Misty had angrily demanded answers, of course believing Team Rocket to be responsible, and Meowth, being the scaredy cat that he was, simply hid behind Wobbuffet as he told Misty this, not wanting to be at her wrath. Ash tries to reason with all the bug Pokemon, explaining they merely just wanted to take the bells back to the safety of the tower, but the bug Pokemon were too angry to listen, as Meowth explained, being able to translate what the bug Pokemon said. Despite this, even Brock tries to reason with the bug Pokemon as they corner Ash and the gang, stating that Ho-Oh would probably be displeased with the bug Pokemon since they were disrupting the peace between humans and Pokemon. As Team Rocket tried their best to get free from the cocoons, obviously failing, Ash tried to free him and the gang from being surrounded by the bugs by having his Cyndaquil use Flamethrower on a nearby web wall so that they could escape. However, the bug Pokemon not only prevent Cyndaquil from using Flamethrower, but also fire even more webs with String Shot to seal Ash and the gang in even more, with the Spinarak and Ariados being the primary culprits of this. In fear that the String Shot would make contact with everyone and trap them just as Team Rocket was trapped, Yusin sent out his Alakazam and told it to use Reflect to block the String Shots to protect everyone. And although this does create a barrier, Yusin saw that they wouldn't be able to reason with the Pokemon and restore balance with them and make peace, so he decided to have his Alakazam try and attack the bug Pokemon, but doing so weakened the barrier, allowing the Tangela to use Vine Whip on Alakazam, knocking him down in one hit. Damn, I guess that Alakazam wasn't very strong after all. Anyways, Yusin quickly recalled him, and Ash tries to prove Yusin wrong, along with his assumption that the Pokemon could no longer be reasoned with by trying to reason with them despite their anger, but this of course fails as a Tangela goes to attack Ash while he was talking, using a Vine Whip. Before the Vine Whip actually hit though, Tangela recalled its vine back, seemingly in fear, as something ran by all the bug Pokemon. Despite this Pokemon only being a shadow, all of the bug Pokemon seemed to be immensely frightened by it as they ran away, also being scared off by a shiny wind that blew, which cut all of the String Shot webs, in the process knocking Team Rocket down to the ground, free from their cocoon. The shadow then stops running, revealing itself as none other than one of the legendary beasts, the wind legendary beast, coincidentally, Suicune, much to Yusin's amazement and shock. Also amazed was Jessie, who knew that Suicune was a legendary Pokemon, and she obviously wanted to capture it for Team Rocket. So she sent out her Arbok to weaken it, ordering it to use Poison Sting. However, Suicune wasn't fazed by this at all, as it merely jumped out of the way to dodge, and then used Aurora Beam to send Team Rocket blasting off in a huge explosion. With Team Rocket and the disgraceful bug Pokemon gone, Suicune decides to retreat to a cliff to relax and observe its surroundings. Ash and the gang were obviously very amazed by the Suicune as well. I mean, it was a goddamn legendary Pokemon, so Ash decided to run up to it and try to greet it and examine it, but he was cut off by Yusin, who declared that he was going to finally achieve his dream of catching the Suicune that he had looked for so long, and no one was going to stand in his way. Morty tried to explain that since legendary Pokemon were so sacred and rare, they shouldn't be caught, and instead left to roam out in the wild, especially since Suicune had a duty of watching over humanity and Pokemon, but Yusin didn't care, as he sent out his Alakazam to battle it. Ash tries to warn him as well, but Yusin ignores him and has his Alakazam use Disable. But Suicune blocks it with a barrier attack, leading Alakazam to then try a Confusion. But before the attack can make contact, Suicune uses a Roar, which has the effect of sending Alakazam back into its Pokeball in fear. Yusin is shocked by this, not knowing what to do, or what Pokemon he could send out next, and due to this distraction that Yusin was facing, Suicune took the opportunity to jump off the cliff and disappear, seemingly vanishing into thin air, much to Yusin's frustration. As Yusin rants, Morty and Ash and the gang tell him to stop, as Suicune hadn't fully vanished into thin air, as it left behind some trail of its presence, being a rainbow in the sky, which Ash and the gang and Morty and Yusin gazed at wonderfully. And they then noticed, as they walked back into town, that all of the webs were now gone, just as the webs in the forest had disappeared, likely because of Suicune. Morty, however, doesn't believe that the rainbow was a trace of Suicune's presence, but rather a trace of Ho-Oh's, believing the rainbow to be Ho-Oh's symbol of peace, which Ho-Oh had decided to spread out after seeing how the bug Pokemon and the humans were now at peace again, thanks to Suicune. Ash and the gang then return to just outside Morty's gym, as Ash promises that if he ever encounters Ho-Oh or Suicune again, he would try to reason with them and explain that he, at least, really cared for Pokemon, showing that not all humans were against them. Morty thanks Ash for this, and shakes his hand, wishing him luck in all of his future gym matches. However, right as Ash and the gang were about to leave, they realized that Yusin was gone, and asked Morty where he went, leading Morty to reveal that Yusin had already left to try and find Suicune again, being super dedicated to do so. Admitting that although Yusin must have known that it would be a very long time until he would likely come across Suicune, he was determined to find it, likely due to being inspired by Ash's determination to save the Crystal Bells and talk with the bug Pokemon, though Misty countered that Yusin likely wasn't inspired by Ash's determination, but rather his stubbornness, insisting that Ash and Yusin were more alike than Ash thought, since they were both stubborn pricks sometimes. Morty then assures Ash and the gang that he had put the Crystal Bells back into the tower, and stated his belief that even though there were now only 3 of them, he hoped that they would still bring enough peace to end any conflict between human and Pokemon, so that Ho-Oh could watch and see that humans and Pokemon didn't all hate each other after all. Reminding Ash and the gang that Ho-Oh would return if it realized this. Ash and the gang stated their wishes for Ho-Oh to return as well, confident that conflict between human and Pokemon would eventually end, as they set off towards Mahogany Town.